Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babiar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Phil Seneath, and this is a part 2 episode. We're talking about newsletters. And of course, Phil works with Campus Outreach, and he and his wife and kids, they live in Alabama. So Phil, my friend, welcome back to the SRS Podcast.
Hey, Aaron. Good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
All right. So I don't know this story, but as you and I were just kind of talking and connecting, you mentioned something about your wife has beat Steph Curry, who's like one of my all-time favorite basketball players after Michael Jordan. She has beat him in a 3-point contest. What were you talking about? Tell that story for everybody to hear.
Yeah, so the brief version is my wife's name is Ashley. We both went to Davidson College, which is outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. I played football there. She was on the women's basketball team there. She actually, for a period of time, had the 3-point record on the women's team at Davidson. But we were there at the same time that Steph Curry was. And obviously, I would imagine most people know Steph Curry, who plays for the Golden State Warriors, multiple-time NBA champion, if people don't know. But Steph was there playing at Davidson at the same time we were. Oh, wow. And this was the year after the Elite Eight run that Davidson made, and the first practice of every season. A lot of Division I teams do this. They call it a Midnight Madness practice, where they, first practice, the whole student body comes to the gymnasium, and there's some, a scrimmage and a free throw contest. Well, there was also a 3-point contest where they put the ball racks around the 3-point line on one side of the floor, and Steph shot over there. And then they put the ball racks around the other 3-point line on the other side of the floor. And my wife Ashley shot there. And they went toe to toe, from one corner to the top of the key down to the other corner. And at the end of it, she beat him by one basket. Yeah. So I always say that my claim to fame is that I'm married to the only person that you've probably ever met or heard of that has beaten Steph Curry in a 3-point shooting contest.
That's fantastic. I love that. Well, I'm a basketball guy for sure. A couple of my sons played some college ball, and I'm one of those rare people that I love watching all the playoffs and all the finals. So, and I'm a big Steph Curry guy. So that is hilarious. I love it. Yeah, that's definitely a claim to fame. Hey, can I just say, Phil, your wife way cooler than you.
I tell that to every person I meet. So yes, I'm well aware.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, hey, let's pick up the thread from last week. We were talking about newsletters, and we were talking about sometimes people have the struggle to make themselves the hero instead of making God the hero. And we were digging into that. I think we went a pretty good distance with it, but let's pick that up before we keep going. And so pick up that thread a little bit for us, Phil, because I know you had some more thoughts, but we reached the end of the episode. And so I'm going to hand you the microphone, so to speak, and have you continue.
Yeah, it's great. So one of the things we tell our staff is when they come in for training is we give them sort of a communication 101. And if the listeners could just, a mental picture of a 4-story building, and the top story of that building, the 4th floor, we call vision. There's certain types of communication that are vision-oriented communication. The next floor down, the 3rd floor, is strategy. The 2nd floor is program. And then the bottom floor, the 1st floor, on the street level are stories. So from top to bottom, you've got vision, strategy, program, and stories. Okay. And our observation and our contention is that the overwhelming majority of missionary or gospel worker communications, whether it's newsletters or anything else, almost exclusively focus on the middle 2 floors, the 3rd floor of strategy and the 2nd floor of program. And we almost completely leave out vision and stories by default, without training, without intentional, conscious effort over time. And that's just not the best way to make God the hero. Because if you think about it, vision and stories, the top floor and the bottom floor, are all about imagining what we want God to do in the future, which is vision, and then stories, which is all about what God is doing right now or recently just did. Versus the middle 2 floors, strategy and program, is really about what your organization is doing. What you're trying to do to accomplish the vision in terms of strategy, or programmatically what activities or services you are providing to whatever beneficiary you're ministering to. So that's a framework we use to say, hey, either live on the top floor or live on the street level, but don't live in the middle two floors in terms of thinking about your newsletter communications.
Nice. Okay. So as people are processing through that, imagine, Phil, that you're sitting down with a brand new worker, someone who's really trying to grow in their communication, and you gave kind of I like your floors analogy, but what's another simple framework for how people can think about growing their communication?
It's really one simple question, Aaron. You got to ask yourself the question, do your newsletters spotlight what you are doing, or do they spotlight what God is doing? Mm-hmm. And if you were to write out your newsletter, or maybe look at your newsletters over the last few months, go through your newsletters and ask these two follow-up questions. Do your newsletters tend to share more about ministry events, program offerings, travel calendar, and cultural experiences? Or do they tend to share more about changed lives, key moments, and progress made? And, just some examples here to kind of put some color commentary on those two categories there. On the program activity strategy side, you could, and these are, abbreviations here, but your newsletters could be about like, hey, we have this evangelistic Bible study coming up, or we are building a house or digging a well in this remote village, or we're starting this new training program on this campus, or this conference is coming up, or the project is coming up, or, hey, we're meeting students in the cafeteria, or we just went on a visa run, or any number of different things that are happening. And again, those are not bad things. It's just, as we said last time, that's not what people were supporting you to do. Versus on the other side, if your messages or your stories are more about things like, God saved Frank 2 weeks ago, and right after that, Frank, after having become a Christian, led Bob to faith. Or God's using the summer project to help us meet 75 new non-Christians, and we're in the process of following up with them and starting Bible studies. Or at the English camp, 50 non-Christian students came, were trained in how to begin speaking English, and now we can follow up with them evangelistically. Or different things like that are talking about what's happening, but they're talking about what's happening in a way that makes it clear in what that is resulting in and what that's leading to.
Yeah.
And the bottom line that we try to get across people is you can either talk about activity or you can talk about impact. And those are the two key words, activity versus impact. And look at your newsletters and really evaluate, am I talking about what I'm doing or what our organization is doing? That's activity. Or am I talking about what that activity is leading to and resulting in? And that's impact. And that's really the key difference.
Same story, but in a lot of ways, completely different impact when you consider how you're telling that story, who you're making the hero, how it's connected to the vision. Because otherwise, quite honestly, it could just look like a travel blog, right?
That's right. Exactly. And Aaron, that's the key difference, right? Because there's a nuance. People will literally say like, sir, are you telling me not to talk about our ministry activity at all? And we always say, hang on, time out, back up. Activity and impact are not completely separate things. It's more how you talk about the activity. We should talk about activity in a way that makes it explicitly clear what those programs and ministry activities are leading to and resulting in. So I think you're that's good. It's really
that's from personal experience, by the way, because
that's right.
I'm blessed in that I love to travel. I truly do, and I get to travel a lot with Support Raising Solutions and with Exago, and I tell you what, that's an easy brag for me. Like if I want to, I can sit here and list out all these great, wonderful, awesome places that many people will never have a chance to go to, where I haven't just been there, I have spent time there. And I just became really convicted of that a while back when I realized, when I send out, like if I put up an Instagram photo of, say, the Golden Gate Bridge or the Great Wall of China or something like that, like if I just put that stuff up when I'm there and there's no context, really quickly that can devolve.
You're just on vacation,
yeah. Which, like, I'm all for vacation. We should totally go on vacation. Also, I go to some really cool places sometimes, and I'm just so not on holiday. Like that's not why I'm there. But it can the coolness factor can distract from the vision factor, from giving God the glory factor, to the point that now, Phil, and not that I never ever post, but quite honestly, I have a big check, and there are many times where I don't post because I'm like, I do not have the energy to explain all the ministry connections about this right now.
That's
I can
right.
talk about it later on, but it's just not necessary for me to show that I'm at Top Golf in Charlotte today.
That's right. Yeah.
After 10 hours of meetings. Like that, just people wouldn't understand that. So why waste my time, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that, Aaron. Well, I know we're going to get into a couple of the tips and techniques, and I have 4 of those here in a minute I'd love to share, but I'd love to flip it on you. I mean, I'd love to ask you 2 questions. And one of them is, I'm just curious to know. The second one is a question that we get a lot that I've honestly never had a good answer for. And I'd love to know what you think about it.
Well, I'm sure I have a bad answer for it too. So
okay, great. The first one is, what is your biggest newsletter gaffe or embarrassment that you've ever made? And then the second one, which I really am curious to know, is how much should we be talking about our family? For those of us that have spouses and children, how much should we include in our newsletters about family? Because, again, we don't want our newsletters to be a travel blog or just a family saga report about all of our kids' accomplishments on the soccer field.
Right.
But our supporters know that we have families.
Yeah.
So we've never been able to articulate a clear balance or live in that tension in a way that is appropriate, but also doesn't, let those overpower the newsletter. So I'd love to know those, your thoughts on those questions.
Well, I actually think I have an answer for that second one. I won't say it's a perfect answer, but it's worked well for me for years. So I'd be happy to share that.
Sure.
But first of all, my biggest gaffe was definitely early on in Exago. Of course, Exago equips ministry leaders to survive and thrive. I get to partner with Support Raising Solutions. They are a wonderful partner, and I kind of get to have my feet in both worlds. So I get to train and do podcasts and stuff with Support Raising Solutions. But as far as the IRS is concerned, I work for Exago Ministries. I helped launch that many years ago, and our whole focus is coaching and training, and working with ministry leaders, and we do support raising coaching and member care type coaching. And anyway, I digress. But here's the deal: early on in Exago, I needed funds, meaning I had raised what I thought was full funding, but then some projects came up, and I realized, man, consistently we are 20% short of what we need for like everything. And so I had this wonderful, AKA terrible, wonderful idea of, I put in a newsletter, hey, everybody that reads and supports, we need you to raise your support by 20%. So can everybody please on May 20th, call our admin and tell her, yes, I'm going to raise my support by 20%. And I mean, I'd done the math. It totally would have worked.
You knew exactly what you wanted to happen.
Exactly what I wanted to happen. And it just didn't work at all. And I tell that story. Sometimes people ask me about it in Support Raising Boot Camp, and I can give a longer answer. But the short version is I made it everybody's problem because it was in a newsletter, which means it's nobody's problem. And I only had one person that called. Out of dozens and dozens of people that got that newsletter. And bless her heart, she was giving $20 a month. So she went up to $22 a month. And that turns out that didn't cover our financial need. And I put a lot of effort and time into printing and mailing things and an email marketing campaign. And I put all this effort into having newsletter raise support. And I learned that's just not how to do it. And I tell you what, that was an expensive lesson to learn. So
you also put a bad taste in everybody's mouth too.
You bet I did. You bet. In fact, I tried to call a couple people. I'm like, hey, you forgot to call. And they're like, no, I didn't. I read your newsletter. I'm not doing anything. Awkward. So, okay. So on your second question, there's an 80-20 rule, and I cannot take credit for this. I learned this from Shadrach, I think, from Steve Shadrach, the author of The God Ask, which is a great book. Hopefully all of our listeners have listened to that book. If you haven't, you're missing out. Go buy one and read it today, The God Ask by Steve Shadrach. There's this isn't in that book, but this is a concept I learned from Steve, that roughly 20% of your news in your newsletter should and could be about your family. Now, I don't follow that religiously. In fact, I do it slightly different. I actually have 0% of my newsletters talk about my family 10 out of 12 months. And then 2 out of 12 months, I make it more of a family newsletter. Think more like a Christmas type newsletter. Absolutely. Just one to 2 pages, something short that updates. Because I know that there are people that they like the vision for ministry, but really they believe in Marky and I. They know our hearts for the kingdom. They know if we're working on it, they just trust us, and they want to support us. They want to pray for us. They want whatever vision they feel like God's leading us into, they're like, we're with you, we're riding with you, period. And so we don't want it to make it about us, and yet people are interested in us.
That's right.
And so there's always a balance there. And so we've just kind of landed there. And honestly, I like that. That works for us because we have 4 kids. That's a lot of stories to tell. So I'm just only talking about my kids twice a year. Technically, we have 5 now because one of our sons has married. And so I can give like a little update on everybody twice a year, and that seems to that my support team seems to really appreciate that. And also, it's easy to save stuff up and major on the majors and not.
That's right. If you batch it twice a year, then you can just wait for all those accomplishments to accrue. That's right.
Whereas when it's monthly, if you do that, which you can, some people do, but it's like, okay, well, which kid do we love this month that we're going to talk about? Like there's almost like this rotation. But oh, wait a minute, John and Reagan won a state basketball championship. Well, it's not their month. I'm not going to mention it. Like I just learned over time to go, okay, you know what? Every 6 months or so, I put out a newsletter that says, hey, here's an update about the Babyars that are missionaries with Exago. And we normally talk about ministry, but every now and then we'd like to tell you about us and what's going on with us. And I've never had anybody complain about us doing that. So that's what's worked for us. That's and really that 80-20 rule I have heard has worked well for others. I'm sure that there's probably a more scientific thing that somebody could do, but that's my answer. That's what I suggest when people are trying to have that balance. So if it's a monthly newsletter, I say, hey, make roughly 20% of your newsletter just be about you. You don't have to be married and have kids. You can be a single, just out of college person, but let people get to know you. Tell people about, hey, this month on a day off, I went on a hike and I took my dog, Juliet, with me, and it was a great time. Or, hey, this month I went back home to Iowa and met my family. Like, let people know that you're a person. Let people get to know you a little bit in 20% of every newsletter. So there's my imperfect answer, Phil. What
that's great. No, that's super helpful. Thank you. I'm going to turn right back around and share that with some of our staff. So that's
great. Great.
If you get to help others as they're raising their support, a fair question to consider is, who's helping you? Who's pouring into you and helping you increase your capacity and ability as a support-raising leader, trainer, or coach? May I suggest that you be sure that you're a part of the SRS network, because it can be a matter of access. Access to a discount to the Support Raising Leaders Conference, access to the online course SRS Foundations, and access to the SRS Network member resource page. The SRS Network is designed to resource you and connect you with others who are also trying to develop support raisers for the Great Commission. Make sure that you are a part of the SRS Network.
All right, so Phil, I know we need to kind of get back on track here. We're about to wrap up this podcast episode soon, but there were some tips and some tricks that you alluded to before, and so let's kind of make that our final point of conversation today, and dig into some of those tips and tricks that are going to be helpful for people to keep in mind as they're developing their newsletters moving forward.
Yeah, that's great, Aaron. Well, the first thing before I say the first tip is everyone, if they're just getting started or if they've been doing this for a long time and are just trying to polish up on their newsletter communication, just to give yourself grace, because one of the things we say is the language of activity is native. We're all native speakers of the language of activity. The language of impact is learned, and it takes time. So just give yourself grace to learn to speak that, because it takes practice, it takes reps. So now to the tips. So number one, we would encourage everyone to write themselves out of the story. Now, if it's their story, that's really, really hard to do. And yet all the more important, because if you are a character in that story, if you're the person that led the person to Christ, or you're the one that gave the talk, or provided the service or whatever, the temptation is overwhelming to put yourself too close to the center of the story and not to make God the hero. So challenge yourself. And can you tell that story in a way that does not refer to yourself at all? Now, if the story is not yours, or if you are just one of the characters in the story, it can be a bit easier to do, but it's still a challenge worth taking on. Try to write yourself out of the story and tell the story in a way that makes God the hero, and whoever's life was transformed or impacted, tell it from their perspective. The second tip would be put your newsletter to the he versus me test. And this is kind of a common idea, but we just would say, hey, how much are you talking about, he, meaning God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, versus me, I, we, us, those types of pronouns, which are referring to yourself. So just read your newsletter and put it to the he versus me test. And are you referring to God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit a lot more than you are to yourself? The third thing would be another test. Put it to the past, present, and future test. Because if you're talking about the past, you're probably telling stories of things that have happened. Versus if you're talking about the future, you're probably talking about vision. You are casting vision and inspiring people's hearts and imaginations for what you're trusting God for in the future. And the past and the future, that's where you want to live. Not to say the present isn't where you want to live, but if you're talking about the present, you're probably talking about strategy and program. Remember, those are the two middle floors of the 4-story building. And that's not, a rule and truth for all times and all places, but generally, the past, present, future test is a good test to apply to your newsletter. And you want it to focus mostly on the past and on the future and not as much on the present. And then the fourth tip would be have someone who that's a good communicator. Maybe it's someone in your organization. Maybe, Aaron, it's someone on your support team who works in the media industry or who works, in some type of, they're a writer or an author or an editor. Have someone who that's a good communicator, either in your organization or on your support team. Review your newsletters for 3, 4, 5 months in a row before you send them. And
which takes a little bit of humility because
it takes a ton of humility.
Like
exactly. But we have our staff do that. And in fact, one of the staff, 2 offices over from me did that to me a couple months ago. And I've been reviewing his newsletters. And it's just like, man, just what humility that he has to ask someone to speak into that and give the feedback. But you know what, Aaron? He's doing it with a few people and his newsletters have gotten a ton better. So just have someone speak into and give you feedback and review your newsletters.
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, those seems to be really practical tips. And I'll say, especially on that last one, find somebody who's harsh, not in a mean way, but
they'll tell you what you don't want to hear. That's right.
Well, my wife, she had an English minor. She's a teaching degree. She had an English minor. And I used to really not want Marky to see the newsletter before I sent it out. And over time, I got to the point where I was just like, oh, you know what? She's not here to hurt me. I need to take my lumps. So I wanted to, I had that sense of urgency too. I finally got it out or ready to go and I wanted to send it and I'd be like, no. And so I take it to her and say, if there's any feedback, please give it to me by, tomorrow or 2 days from now so I can make adjustments. And at first, like I said, she had a school teacher degree. So, she would bleed red all over that page, right? With the red, with the red pen. But over time, it became a thing where she learned me up, so to speak, right? I got so much better learning to look for the things that she just naturally knew how to help edit out, where it got to the point where I would send her a newsletter and say, hey, can you look at this before I send it out? And she goes, well, I can, but it's probably already ready. So what happened is I grew, but I wouldn't have grown if I would have, had that piece of humble pie many times over.
That's right.
to make myself a better newsletter writer. So that's one that I definitely have experienced. I'm affirming that you're giving great advice, and it wasn't easy, but I definitely learned by following similar advice. So. Well, Phil, we've covered a lot in these 2 episodes about newsletters. And so as is my habit, I like to give the guest the final word, the final exhortation. And so I humbly hand you the mic one more time, my friend, before we leave this episode.
Well, and I'll just go back to where we started in the first episode and just reiterate that newsletters are the keystone tool of connecting with our ministry partners and communicating to them the compelling vision of ministry that they're making possible through their partnership. And it's just an incredible opportunity for us to refresh their vision, to rejuvenate their spirit, to deepen and renew their passion for God's kingdom, and then to help them connect their everyday lives to what God is doing in places all over the world. So it's so easy to sit down at your computer to write your newsletter and just have this, dark spirit of what in the world am I going to say? And is anyone going to care? And I feel like I have to prove myself all over again by whatever I'm getting ready to write out in my newsletter. And we just have to get away from that thinking. Mm-hmm. And we really just have to get into the frame of mind to say, you know what, this is an incredible means that God has given me to tell stories of what he's doing through this ministry, and then to really serve my partners and to inspire them and to thank them and to challenge them to dream even bigger for what God could do in the future through our partnership. So it's just a real opportunity and a way that we really can connect them directly to what God is doing all over the world. And I try to get our staff to get really excited about their newsletters because they're really just bragging on God. And that's something that we should all get excited about.
Amen. Good word. Phil, thank you for joining us on the SRS podcast.
Thanks, Aaron. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisinSolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.